So you're driving up to the gas station where everyone is at and has their interceptors, but that's the problem, you don't have one. Now before I tell you how to turn that old Chevy into an interceptor, we need to remind you of the basics. Twisted is a storm-chasing game where your goal is to earn money through gathering data on tornadoes. This can be done in various ways and make varying amounts of money. Twisted has various mechanics, but for making money and progressing, here are the relevant ones. The radar is well, exactly what it sounds like, and it lets you see anything related to location, such as where you are, where others are, the map, etc. However, it also lets you see storms, like real weather apps, but also tornadoes, their strength, and their predicted path, as well as a few others. The radar can be opened by pressing N, however when open you cannot control vehicles or yourself. There are symbols and shapes on the radar, and they all have a meaning, but most importantly, any hollow triangles are a tornado, TVS icons, and any orange, red, or dark purple outlines show the predicted path of a tornado. The other symbols are told by the in-game legend, which can be found at the bottom right of the radar. With all of this in mind, with tornadoes note that the radar is intentionally not completely accurate, which I'll get to later. These are the stats that mostly determine how strong and likely a tornado is to form. With thermodynamics, the main stats to look at are CAPE and SRH. CAPE mainly determines how likely a storm and tornado are to develop, while SRH mainly determines how strong a tornado is. The more of either one, the better. Other stats can be at play, but mostly 3 CAPE, and the lapses. If you want to learn more about the stats in-game, hovering your mouse over each stat tells you what it does. The day risks are also determined by the thermodynamics, so high days have the set of stats that you should want for tornadoes. The thermodynamics also shows storm motion, located on the right panel, which shows where storms and tornadoes will usually be heading, and how fast too. There are 3 main ways to earn money in Twisted, those being probing, intercepting, and scanning. I will now talk about each in detail and how to do each one. Probing in practice earns the most money in Twisted, and is what you start with. With probing, you deploy a probe in a spot the tornado is going to hit, then the probe earns money as the tornado rolls over, only 65 miles per hour winds plus, all we need to do is make it as efficient as we can for more money. First, we have to make sure the tornado is going to hit our probe, and to do that, don't rely on radar, unless it's night, use your eyes, and if the tornado is not growing more on one side or another, you're good to probe and run. If it is growing one side or another, make sure to move in that direction, as tornadoes tend to shift and make quick changes. Of course, because of this, don't stay too far away, but don't also be so close, as things can get dangerous quickly. A quick way to get somewhat close for fine adjustments is to use the storm motion mentioned earlier, as it shows generally where tornadoes will head. Now personally, with probes I would place all the probes I have in one spot, as if you have done those steps correctly, then you basically can multiply whatever one probe earned by how many you placed, which even if you only earned like $500 with one, that's $2,000 on an optimal probing vehicle. Now, while intercepting is less risky than probing due to the vehicles you use, that also means it earns less, as all interceptor vehicles carry max of 2 probes. Intercepting is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of running when in its path, you instead stay there and deploy, more on that later. You require an interceptor to even do this, as without one, you'll die. This method of money making is usually for after probing, as well, it's less risky so earning money is more reliable, albeit less per intercept. Using the previous things with probing here makes it near guaranteed to have an intercept. You also can bring probes with you, but just make sure to enter the vehicle before winds get too high. Also more on that later. Scanning is also, well, exactly what it sounds like. This method of making money utilizes a special truck that has its own radar, to scan wind speeds from afar. This method may make more money than intercepting, however most of the time the wind speeds scanned are less than inside the tornado. However, this method is for a long shot the safest and laziest, as you do not have to even be in its path, just near it, and once it starts scanning, almost no setup is required. A thing to note is that the radar does have a line of sight, meaning scans can be blocked by obstacles, so make sure to deploy and position well, along just making the angle right. When you earn money, it's important to save it wisely instead of buying whatever you can afford. I will talk about vehicles and probes in this mini section, and tell you which are the best for buying. With your starter truck, get used to the game and practice your skills. Once you have some money saved up, personally I would advise getting the Scout variant of the 1991 Navarra Territory for $9,400. It has 4 probes and a mezzanette, more on that later, as well as having faster top speeds on and off-road. Now, with this I personally just grinded 1,000 plus miles with it and earned $1 million for the first time. Yeah, don't do that unless you have my patience. But in all seriousness, you can stick with your Scout until $100,000, or you can buy the Vortex 2 probe truck variant of the 2006 Bullhorn Buffalo 1500 for $69,000, actually, and it still carries 4 probes. If you stick with your Scout, once you have the $100,000, buy the Dominator 1 as your first Interceptor, with a very quick deploy time and great wind resistance. After that, you could buy Dominator 2 next, but if you are spending 1.5 Dominator 1s for 20 miles per hour more wind resistance, it isn't worth it. Instead, you should save up for Dominator 3 with 40 miles per hour more wind resistance, and it also has 5 seats, along with a still very quick deployment time. Once you have Dominator 3, you could get Viv 2, which has even greater wind resistances than Dominator 3, at the cost of deployment time. Now, there are variants of Viv 2, which do impact the stats, but we want the highest wind resistance and quickest deployment, and statistically wise, the 2010 variant is the best, tied with the 2009 variant. Instead of Viv 2, you could get the Dow 3. The Dow 3 is much more expensive than Viv 2, but it is super easy to make money with it. If you still want to progress, then well, there is the Dow 6, for $750,000, which has an even longer range and carries probes. As well as just being a bigger flex. A thing I forgot to mention is that all warehouse vehicles have the ability to deploy. On the Dominators and Vivs, this makes it so they can withstand winds up until their max wind resistances, while on the Dows, it raises the vehicle so the radar's line of sight can see over obstacles. You start with about $6,500, I think, when you join the game. This is more than enough to buy whatever 3 probes your truck can handle, but for which probe to buy? I personally would choose the TwistX Tower probe. It costs the most at $1,250, but it generates the most money of any probe in game. A good alternative is the Toto probe, which while not as efficient, has way more durability, earning it more money over its lifetime. Either way, both are great options, with the TwistX being better for fast intercepts, and Toto for slower ones. Gamepasses and Twisted are mainly just for helping the player earn more money, either directly or indirectly. I will be going over each Game Pass, telling what it does and if it's worth the price. The 2x Income Game Pass is pretty self-explanatory. It doubles any money you make through any means, like probing or scanning. It costs 200 Robux, but since it literally makes you double the money, I'd say it's definitely worth it. Also pretty self-explanatory by the name, the Infinite Fuel Game Pass makes you have no need to refuel our vehicle, although it is only like $450 on the Dows at most. If refueling is an issue for you, go ahead. But personally, it ain't worth it for also 200 Robux. Again, self-explanatory. The Custom Vehicle Color Game Pass lets you color dealership vehicles any color you want, rather than the factory options. However, this also applies to chaser vehicles like the Scout or Vortex 2 probe truck, even the Doghouse. Personally, I think for 50 Robux a little overpriced, but it is still worth it. Yet again, self-explanatory. The Chainsaw Game Pass gives you, well, a chainsaw that can cut trees that have fallen in the road for some money in return. Not very useful since you can drive around the fallen tree, but you can chase people with it. Overall, personally not that worth it. This Game Pass gives you 10 grand and the 1997 Falcon Traveler XD, or the first-gen Ford Expedition IRL. This vehicle and the money may be useful in the beginning, but for 150 Robux while you can easily earn all of this back. Personally not worth it at all. The Drone Game Pass lets the user fly a drone, which essentially works as free cam, paired with the cinematic mode, J, and it allows for great shots of the game otherwise not possible to get to with the player. Overall I think it's cool, but overpriced. Personally not worth it. The Fire/EMS Game Pass lets you use emergency fire/medical vehicles and heal NPCs after a tornado hits a town, earning money. While you do get access to exclusive vehicles and can earn money that way, for 350 Robux, personally not worth it as you usually can re-intercept tornadoes. The National Weather Service, or NWS for short, is a game pass where you get access to the NWS office at the KZHL building in Hazleton, allow you to issue storm and tornado warnings, and passes damages for EF ratings, and all that earns money. Personally, while all of these perks are nice, for 650 Robux I just feel like that's unaffordable, especially when something like the 2x income Game Pass earns way more money. Not worth it. The SKYWARN Spotter Game Pass lets you report tornado types, hail sizes, and wind gusts that appear on radar. It is cheap, at 75 Robux, but since I couldn't find anyone talking about how it makes money or even is good, I'll assume that it isn't that good. Personally not worth it anyways. In this section I'll just be giving general advice and also letting you know about other, less important game mechanics. Pretty self-explanatory but also kinda needed. Anything like hitting a sign super fast, driving off-road, hail, mostly anything that would require maintenance on a real vehicle could damage your vehicle and then require maintenance to fix. Suspension and wheel damage can come from driving off-road, body damage can come from hitting things in general, but also hail. And engine damage, well, I guess just general impacts. It is important to note that your vehicle will never completely stop functioning, so it isn't needed, however poor maintenance will result in terrible brakes, abysmal acceleration, your vehicle actually looking damaged, stuff like that. Repairs can be done at any of the repair shops around the map in cities. Vehicle upgrades can come in various forms, and do various things. A mesonet measures wind speeds, which can be read from inside your vehicle instead of just your probes. It also protects your vehicle from hail as it has a mesh texture on it. Lifting the vehicle increases your off-road speed, shocks decrease the bumpiness of dirt roads and reduce suspension and will damage over time. Lifting and upgrading shocks can be expensive but save money in the long run, as well as boosting your performance. Wheel offset does nothing but can make your vehicle look better, as well as the tire and rim choices. Hydroplaning is when a layer of water forms between the tire and the road surface, causing the car to basically be water sliding. In Twisted, hydroplaning can happen if you suddenly brake in heavy rain, turning in heavy rain, accelerating a rear-wheel drive car in heavy rain, going over debris in the road, stuff like that. To avoid it, try to first not buy a rear-wheel drive car, brake in bursts when in rain, and try to not corner at your top speed. Hail damage is the main cause of body damage in Twisted, and there are a few ways to avoid it. First, if your vehicle allows it, install a mesonet. As stated earlier, the mesh on the mesonet actually prevents hail damage, so that won't be an issue. Also, avoid areas on the map with red or even white reflectivity, as this indicates hail, along with a filled-in triangle. Another thing is to stay inside, as hail does damage the player very slowly over time, but with vehicles you can park it under gas stations or inside home garages. A hook is the part of a storm where a tornado forms, and these usually form at the bottom of storms and slightly to the east, making predicting where they could go based on storm movement easier. Storm graphics can be enabled or disabled in the in-game settings, and it affects if hail, wind effects, rain, stuff like that. I would advise keeping this on as it will let you know if a tornado is about to kill you. With that, I'd like to conclude this video, and yes, I know I may have not covered some other stuff about Twisted, but hey, now at this point, hopefully you are living a lavish life in Twisted, and maybe even giving advice to the new players who need it. If you want to learn more about Twisted, I highly recommend you visit the Twisted Wiki, linked in the description below, as they have useful pages about most things, and can give you a more in-depth explanation than what I said, at least for some things, because some facts I listed come from the wiki because I am active